Yung halos lahat ng sibuyas ng bilog, magsaysay,
May ABS-CBN pa, Sir Edmar. ABS-CBN.
Good morning, everyone. So this morning we have asked you to join us in the press conference on the situation in the missionary areas, or what we call the SPAG areas under National Power Corporation. And joining with me this morning are from the DOE side. There's Undersecretary Rowena Guevara and Undersecretary Felix Fuentebella and ASEC Mario Lasigan. And on the National Power Corporation side, we have NPC President Danny Rojas, and our administrator for the National Electrification Administration is Tokayo Nani Almeda. So we, of course, the good news is that we have been able to work together with the members of the National Power Board, including the Department of Finance and Department of Budget and Management, and the National Economic and Development Authority, DNR, DA, and DILG, in order to come up with short-term measures to address the operations and continued delivery of power supply to the off-grid areas. But this is a continuing challenge. As you know, the price of diesel in the international market has been on the uptick in the last week or so. And for the rest of the year, there are indications that unless, of course, there are economic developments in the global area, that the prices of diesel will remain high. So this morning, we would like to have first a presentation from the National Power Corporation about the situation. Now, most of you are may not be aware, but the prices in our missionary areas, which are the areas that are not connected to the grid, are subsidized. But the subsidy is coming from those customers customers in the areas that are connected to the grid. So when there are increases that are needed in order to support the subsidy for the off-grid areas, it is the customers in the on-grid areas that will have to bear the burden, unless, of course, subject to the approval of the Energy Regulatory Commission. So with that introduction, may I now ask the National Power Corporation to proceed with its presentation, and later on there might be questions or clarifications, or a short statement or explanation from the National Electrification Administration on what they have done as well in order to give support to the electric cooperatives operating in the off-grid areas. So may I ask President Nando to please introduce us.
Good morning, everyone. We'd like to acknowledge Ms. Odette Rivera, the manager of our strategic planning, to do the presentation for National Power Corporation.
The Honorable DOE Secretary, Secretary Rafael Latilla, officers from DOE and NEA, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Our presentation for this morning is consisting of two parts. The first part will be our sort of universal charge for missionary electrification 101. And the second part will be the request for additional funding by NPC for 2023 because of the increased fuel prices. So for this portion, we will be explaining a background on the off-grid and missionary electrification. This material consists of the definition of some terms, the basics of universal charge for missionary electrification, and the graduation and rationalization plan. Next slide, please. So just for starters, when we talk about universal charge for missionary electrification, this is the portion of the universal charge that's being collected from all end users, and this is designated for missionary electrification. The other term that we'd like to clarify is the true cost of generation rate, or what we call TCGR, and this refers to the full efficient cost of generating power in an area, both by the government and the private sector. And then we have the subsidized approved generation rate, or SAGR, and that's the rate expressed in peso per kilowatt hour, which the ERC has determined to be socially acceptable for electric cooperatives or distribution utilities to pay for generation service. So the SAGR is further modified by the circular as the generation rates approved by the ERC on a per area and customer class basis. The SAGR combined with the UCME subsidy should be equal to the true cost of generation rate. Other terms that we're introducing is the full cost of recovery rate, or the FCRR, and this term refers to our qualified third parties. When we say qualified third parties, this refers to the private sector who is providing both the generation and the distribution in off-grid areas. So their true cost is called the full cost recovery rate. It refers to the rate expressed in peso per kilowatt hour that recovers the full efficient cost of generating, distributing, and supplying electricity in unviable areas. So the counterpart for the SAGR for the QTP is called the subsidized approved retail rate, or the SARR. It refers to the rate expressed in peso per kilowatt hour, which the ERC has determined to be the maximum cost that an end user should pay for the cost of power and distribution service by the QTP. So next slide, please. So this is just an illustration of the supply side in terms of the true cost generation rate, and the collection side, which is composed of the UCME, the deferred accounting adjustments, and the SAGR. When we look on the left side, the gray area, the true cost of generation rate, that refers to the full efficient cost of generating power in an area, and that is being applied by both the distribution utility and the NPC as determined through a competitive selection process. The true cost generation rate is being approved by the Energy Regulatory Commission. In terms of collection, there are two parts to fulfilling the true cost generation rate. The first part is the subsidized approved generation rate. It's the rate being paid by the distribution utilities to the NPPs, and it's being filed by NPC's fund on a per area basis. And this rate is determined, fixed, and approved by the Energy Regulatory Commission. Considering that there are adjustments in both the fuel and purchase power cost, which is provided by the grant, which we call the generation rate adjustment mechanism, and for the adjustments in the currency exchange rate, which is even through the incremental currency rate adjustment mechanism, the ERC provides for deferred accounting adjustments, which is given on top of the SAGR to between the fund and SAGR and the needed adjustments during the test year. Any funding gap between the true cost generation rate and the subsidized generation rate is being fulfilled by the universal charge for missionary electrification. So the UCME subsidy is a subsidy for missionary electrification. It's being imposed for all electricity end users in the country, and it's determined, fixed, and approved by ERC, and disbursed by NPC to the private sector, which we call the new power providers or qualified third parties. Next slide, please. So when we say true cost of generation rate, this is being collected through the subsidized approved generation rate and the universal charge for missionary electrification. The SAGR is being collected from electricity consumers in the off-grid areas, while the UCME is the subsidy being imposed on all end users in the country. Next slide, please. So this is just a table, tabulation of the universal charge for missionary electrification that's being charged in these areas such as Mindoro, Marinduque, in Palawan, Masbate, Romblon, Quijor, Tawi-Tawi, Basilan, Sulu, and other smaller areas in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So as you can see, we have provided here the new SAGR for CY 2022, 23, and 24. And you can see it around for Mindoro, it's 7.39, and in other areas also. And we also have here a tabulation on the ERC approved UCME rates. For example, in Mindoro, the basic is 15.44 peso per kilowatt hour. And for the RE developers, incentive, that's 0.0017 per kilowatt hour, including the true up. True up is the mechanism being given to us by the ERC for NPC to recover the true cost of producing electricity in addition to the initial basic approval by the ERC, or a total of 18 centavos UCME for all areas in this fund. Next slide, please. So for this slide, it's just we just would like to show the trend that's been happening with regard to the UCME subsidy for the period 2016 to 2021. You will notice between 2016 and 2017, the UCME remittances that we received from some corporations was enough to subsidize the requirements of both the NPC's power plants as well as the subsidy requirements of new power providers or the private sector power providers for 2017 and 2018. However, if you will notice, beginning 2018, the remittances that we are receiving from ISAM is already not enough to cover the subsidy requirements of both the SPAG areas and the NPPs and QPPs. But for the earlier part of 2018 and 2019, we were able to use part of some of the remittances from previous years to augment that. We just would like to highlight the disrupted trend by 2020 because that's an outlier year because of the pandemic. But moving forward, we expect the actual UCME subsidy to have an increasing trend onwards. And this increase is generally affected because of the total electrification program and the 24/7 electricity access that's being strived by government to all of these areas, in addition to the increase in demand and the capacity additions in missionary and off-grid areas. Next slide, please. With regard to the allocation of the UCME in 2022, we just would like to show that NPC had been receiving only about 14.7 billion from ISAM Corporation for allocation to both the new power providers, qualified third parties, and NPC. So for this purpose, NPC is following the ratio of 72% to 28%. So that's 72% for the private sector and 28% for the government sector, which is NPC's part. And that is based on the respective shares in the generation mix in 2022. You will notice later on in the second part of our presentation, you'll see that the allocation of amounts between the NPPs and PPPs are not enough for the actual UCME requirements of both the private sector and the NPPs. Just to give you an idea how the UCME fund or the collection of that is being affected in off-grid areas. So the customers are paying, as can be seen in their power bills, a retail rate, and that they pay that to the distribution utility. And that includes several rates and bundles into the directive of the ERC and of course the requirement of RA 9136. And in that power bill, you will see the universal charge. And that is where the universal charge for missionary electrification is being sourced. So from the distribution utility, the universal charge portion of that is being given to the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation, for which the distribution utilities have power supply agreements especially for the main grid. So it's the Pisang Corporation who's collecting the universal charge in various forms, the standard contract cost, standard debts, and the universal charge for mission and electrification. So what we're saying is the UCME is being collected by Pisang, and that is why it is Pisang who's transferring that fund to NPC. So for 2022, we're looking at 14.624 billion UCME collection from Pisang Corporation. So this is the slide which will explain the disbursement. So as a continuation of the previous slide, when the Pisang Corporation receives the payments of the distribution utilities on this, NPC transfers the subsidy portion with regard to the universal charge for mission and electrification to the National Power Corporation. So we just would like to clarify that in the off-grid areas, we are now looking at two private power suppliers and the NPC SPAC, which are the power generation providers in the off-grid and island grid areas. So for the new power providers, since they have power supply agreements with the distribution utility, they receive NPC provides the universal charge for missionary electrification to them as a form of subsidy. And next, yeah. So while the distribution utility pays for the subsidized approved generation rate to the new power provider, the difference between the NPP's true cost and the SAGR that's being collected from the DU, that's being provided for by the UCME subsidy, and that is what's coming from the NPC. So in the meantime, we also provide cash incentive to RE developers, which is provided by 50% of the UCME. So that's about 50 million in 2018. And that's being given to RE developers. So that's for the UCME subsidy. In the meantime, since NPC is also operating SPAC power plants in the off-grid islands, we also have our own share of the UCME subsidy, which is the difference between our true cost and the subsidized approved generation rate that we collect from the distribution. Next slide, please. So, what is the long-term plan for the UCME? So we have here the government program of subsidy graduation and rationalization policy. And highlighted here, and it's part of the graduation program, is the interconnection of the island grids to the main grid. For example, Mindoro, Palawan, and Marinduque. Because if those islands are connected to the main grid, automatically the UCME subsidy will cease in these areas, and that will lessen the impact of the UCME in the off-grid islands. We also have the interconnection projects, and of course the list of generation planning to be led by the DOE and the distribution utilities to the conduct of competitive selection process. We also have the demand side management and energy efficiency measures for customers, both for the NPC side and the distribution side. And the last one is the customer level rationalization of subsidies. The idea is to classify the customers in the off-grid areas between residential and non-residential customers so that we can have a more targeted allocation of the UCME subsidy for these types of customers. So overall, if these programs are being implemented in the long term, we expect to reduce the requirement for universal charge for missionary electrification that's being collected from all end users. Next slide, please. So that's the first part. It's a 101 on the UCME, and it serves as a backdrop or an explanation or a context to our second part of the presentation from NPC. So this is the second part of our presentation. We would like to show you NPC's additional funding requirements for 2023 to sustain our operations amidst the increasing fuel prices. Next slide, please. So just a short background on NPC before we focus on the missionary electrification. After privatization of most of its power plants, especially the main grid, NPC is still undertaking the following mandates. First, we have the missionary electrification, and that's under RA 9136. It mandates us to perform missionary electrification in the off-grids and islands. And the second one is to promote the utilization of renewable energy sources in our operations. Next, we still have the watershed management. We still manage 11 watershed areas in the main grid in support of power generation for both hydro and geothermal plants. We still have dams management. We continue to be responsible for 12 large dams. That's 5 in Luzon and 7 in Mindanao. And all other appurtenant structures necessary for the safe and reliable operation of hydro power plants. And finally, our remaining mandates in the main grid, that's the operation and maintenance of undisposed main grid assets, and that includes the 7 hydro plants in Agus and Pulangi in Mindanao. We still have, together with co-management with Pisang, contract management of 7 independent power producers in behalf of Pisang Corporation, and that's under an NPC Pisang management and operation agreement. And finally, through Executive Order 55, we're still the caretaker of the Bataan Nuclear Power Plant in Bataan. Next slide, please. This slide just to show you that, as explained earlier, there are 2 power generation providers in the off-grid islands. And that's the NPC SPAC. We still have 156 plants nationwide. And the new power providers, qualified third parties, and renewable energy developers, 24. And that comprises the private sector power generation providers. However, when we look at energy sales, the private sector already comprise 72%. They're already accountable for 72% of energy sales in missionary areas, while NPC accounts for the remaining 28%. So for NPC, we also have this role of maintaining, developing the transmission system in these major islands, Masbate, Mindoro, Calauan, Catanduanes, and Marinduque. So the other highlight that I'd like to say is that in terms of universal charge for missionary electrification allocation, since the private sector has most of the share in the energy sales, yeah, it requires more UCMA subsidy allocation compared to the NPC spot. Next slide, please. Again, also compared to the private sector, which already provides 24/7 operations in all areas that they service, the NPC spot is left with some other plants that still are not in the level of 24/7 operations. And we have 18 plants, that's 12 to 23 hours, and we have about 54 plants which have less than 12 hours, and that caters to about 851,667 households as of September 2020. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of part of our operating budget of for 2023, and this is the part where we explain already why we are in this situation. So for this portion, we just would like to highlight the requirements of NPC with regard to the budget for 2023. And we can see that in the breakdown of our fuel expenses for SPAC and the new power provider expenses for the private sector. So as you can see, as originally submitted by NPC, we submitted a level of 33,720 based on our original submission to the Department of Budget and Management. However, under the GAA, the approved budget for these 2 expenses only 22.345 billion. So that's a big reduction in our proposal. And as a process, the DBM is only approving the level of expenses that can be supported by funding sources. And that is why we have this level only under the GAA. And that is why, in addition to the reduction from the original submission and the increase in fuel prices, before we go to the augmentation, we just would like to give the background that under the GAA level, the fuel price assumption is only at 55.0428 per liter, based on the DBCC assumption. However, last December, when NPC already had a contract for fuel supply for 2023, the resulting contract price is 74.3475 peso per liter. So that's about 35% increase from the GAA assumption. And that is why, as a result of that increase, in addition to the reduced level from the original submission to the GAA level, our total augmentation requirement is about 19.505 billion for the whole of 2023. And that will bring our total budget for these two expenses to 41.850 billion. So what we'd like to highlight in the blue portion of the augmentation is that out of the 19.5 billion, we were able to identify funding sources already for about 3.6 billion. And that includes the recent approval of the ERC of our UCME petitions late last year, as well as the 5 billion loan that we are looking at borrowing with government financial institutions. We were able to identify 3.616 billion with funding. So what we're looking at is this 15.889 billion, which augmentation we need, but we still without funding. All of that, that's 2.278 billion allocation for SPAC and about 13.249 billion for the private sector expenses. So this is the slide that explains the requirements of NPC with regard to additional funding. So we'd like to highlight 19.505 billion as the total augmentation that we are looking for 2020. Next slide, please. We just would like to give an update on NPC's outstanding fuel and NPP payables as of January 26. For our new power providers, and this refers to the UCME subsidy that we give to them, this has already reached 5.5 billion, and this represents 3 to 4 months unpaid billings already due and financial. And that is why we're implementing delayed payments for the new power providers and qualified third parties in the off-grid and island areas. Meanwhile, for our spot operations, this 1.031 billion refers to our outstanding payables to our fuel suppliers, and this refers to our payables for the billing months of November to December 22, and therefore an overall outstanding payable in the amount of 6.5 billion. Next slide, please. We have already explained this a while ago. We said that out of the 20.7 billion funds received from ISAM, we have allocated 10.7 or about 72% to the private sector, and only about 4 billion, about 28% that's allocated to NPC. And since we already have data on the indicative requirements as of year-end 2022, we'd like to highlight that the requirement of the private sector alone, the NCP's QTPs for 2022, is about 16 billion. So clearly, we have a shortfall of about 6 billion for the private sector, and that is why we are implementing the delayed UCME payments for this sector. And also for the side of NPC, our requirement has come to about 10 billion. So we're looking at a gap of about 6 billion also for the stock. Next slide, please. So what is the impact of the limited budget and funds to the NPC's fuel requirements? So for our forecast for 2023, we have indicated our requirement for 150,555 kiloliters, and that will entail about 11.484 billion amount. However, with only the available budget and supply, as we have explained earlier, NPC was able to procure only 100,608 kiloliters in the amount of 7.5 billion. So, which means we have this gap in fuel supply of about 49,947 kiloliters that we still have to procure. So we'll have to conduct another round of procurement for this requirement. And for this alone, we'll be needing about 3.7 billion at that 74.34775 peso per liter. So in terms of the available quantity, the 100,000 kiloliters, the projected runout date of that is until 31 August 2023. So what we're saying is September onwards, we need to really get the funding so that it will enable us to procure the remaining requirement for fuel supply for 2020. Next slide, please. What is the impact of the limited budget on the operations? So for this slide, we're just translating the available fuel supply, that's 100,608 kiloliters, to the operations of spot areas. So we're saying 96% of that is being allocated to our 24/7 operations, and that's composed of 84 spot power plants. And the available fuel is only good until August 31, 2023. Meanwhile, about 4% of the available fuel is allocated for our power plants, about 72 of them, which have 16 hours operation and below. And their fuel supply is until October 17, 2023. So for this slide, immediately we can look at two scenarios. The first scenario is number one. Our operations group made a simulation on the necessary reduction in operating hours so as to extend the fuel inventory up to December 31, 2023. And the second scenario is that it's possible that there's no reduction in operating hours, provided that NPC will have budget augmentation to procure additional fuel until the end of the year. Next slide. Okay, just a context for this slide. This is the proposal as a result of the simulation made by our operations group. And this just shows the result of simulating the available fuel quantity. How much should it be reduced for it to last until the end of the year? And the result is that for the available fuel supply to last until the end of the year, the 24/7 operations can only operate for 15 hours. The 16-hour operation plants can only operate by 12 hours. And those with below 16-hour operations can only operate 5 hours. And our operations group is saying that if we adopt these reduced operation hours, the electricity supply and the available fuel will last until the end of the year. The next slide, please. So what's the overall impact of the increase in fuel price and the funding deficit in 2023? So as we've said, is the possible proposed reduced operations of 156 existing plants, and that may affect about 450,000 households. The other is the delayed payments to the private sector, the NPCs, PPPs, which may affect also 835,000 households nationwide. So altogether, we're looking at 1.3 million households affected by this issue of funding concern. The other impacts are the deferred implementation of increased operating hours of 48 spot plants, because that's included in our missionary electrification plan. So we'll have to defer that. As well as because of the funding needs, it might also affect the deferred energization for 47 unserved areas, which is supposed to benefit about 33,000 households. And finally, possible deferment of procurements for our spot plants and power purchase. Next slide, please. So what are we looking at as possible sources of funds for 2023? So our first here, and we'd like to highlight, is CRC approval of NPC's basic tariff application and NEA throughout petitions. So NPC has been also meeting and making representations with the ERC on this. And we are thankful for the pronouncement of the ERC when it said that they will fast track the review and evaluation of NPC's applications so that they can give approvals in the coming months for 2023. Number two, we're also looking at additional government subsidy in part or in full for the NPC's public and private sector operations that will not be addressed by possible approvals from the regulatory body. The third one is for the NPC side, we were able to advance already expenses for the Badaan nuclear power plant in the previous years, and that has amounted to about 367 million. So we're looking at reimbursement for that so that we can add to our funding sources. And finally, we've said a while ago that we're looking at borrowings. And in terms of status, we're just awaiting approval of the separate guarantee from the Office of the President of the Philippines for this measure to push to. Next slide, please. So, as discussed, we're looking at the following mitigating measures, and NPC, together with the DOE, is already pursuing the following measures to immediately address the funding gap. We mentioned the loan contracting with the Philippines for the initial loan amount of 5 billion pesos. The approval of NPC's UCMP petitions. What we're looking for is additional 15 centavos per kilowatt hour. And the subsidy, as we have said. This number 4 option, the possible assistance of cooperatives and GUs for advance payment. We are exploring this with our customers and stakeholders. And the initial indication is that the requirement for advance payment might be too high for them to advance pay. And that is why we are reconsidering this option. And number 5, and this is as a last resort, we might be forced to implement reduction of operating hours just in case there will be no additional funding identified for 2020. Next slide. This is just an enumeration of our sustainability plan for the long term, but we would like to highlight the reasonable timely recovery of incurred costs or tariff approvals. We would like to also to highlight the UCME rationalization, and that refers to the customer classification in spot areas. The UCME graduation program, that's the interconnection of some of the major islands to the main grids. And for the NPC side, we would also like to highlight our efforts to accelerate hybridization of our spot power plants with renewable energy resources so that we can reduce our dependence on imported oil. And we're also looking at transmission planning and infrastructure development. And with the cooperation of the NEA and our electric cooperatives and distribution utilities, we're also looking at fast-tracking the private sector participation program in missionary areas, as well as the PPP arrangement for our RD projects. So that ends the NPC presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Administrator Almeida, would you want to add your perspective on how you have been, NEA has been trying to help out with the contingency plans and other steps as far as the isolated electric co-ops are concerned?
Yeah, good morning, Sec. We have conducted a series of meetings with the NPC group, and we have touched base with the 21 electric cooperatives that have spot operations. And regarding the alternative mitigating scheme of advancement of payment for fuel, it's still work in progress. And although some AAA electric cooperatives are very much receptive of the idea since they are financially capable of doing so. However, on some isolated or some small cooperatives that have maybe impediment in their cash position, we're still trying to figure out on how to help them. But definitely, NEA is bent in trying to assist NPC to augment the ill effects of the operational effects of the this present situation. Of course, we in NEA are trying to prevent power shredding. So our the member consumers of we're trying to mitigate the effects of the present UCME and NPC financial situation, that it will not affect the member consumers fully. If only mitigated, we can work out something. On the part of NEA also, we are encouraging the establishment or formulation of the or maybe the electric cooperatives entertaining the idea of the embedded renewables supply. And we are assisting our cooperatives to fast track this measure so we can augment and find solutions for alternative sources of supply, not only in the SPAG areas, but all of the electric cooperatives under the supervision and control of National Electrification Administration.
Right.
Okay, thank you. So can you direct now your questions, what is this, to National Power Corporation, unless you have something to add later. Okay, please. Can I ask Andrea to moderate and direct questions?
Okay. Before we proceed with other issues, just in case we will already proceed with questions or clarifications on the issues presented. So Mirna, we signify to ask the first question. Please go ahead.
Hi, Andrea. Hi, sir. Question for Napocor. Just for record, yung fuel nyo for the summer months, that's enough kasi yung run out that you're looking at is August 2023 pa. And my other question is, if you would have to resort to reduction of operating hours, which co-option worstly affected, especially yung 5-hour to 12-hour lang yung operation? And if you would have to get subsidy from national government, which agency yung magre-release niyan? Even yung BNPP reimbursement.
Hi, Mirna. Can you repeat the first question, please?
Yung fuel, will that be enough for summer months? So, hindi problema na you have to reduce the operating hours. Hi, Doc Nani.
Hi. Well, the idea that was presented by Ms. Odette is really effectively to ration the available fuel throughout the entire year. That's the basic idea. So we had initially announced a start of the rationing as early as February, but we have not finished the consultation. So we decided to defer it back to for consideration for March. The second question again, Mirna?
The second question is, if you would have to resort to reduction of operating hours, which co-ops or areas will be worst affected, especially yung mga 5 and 12 hours that you've mentioned in the presentation?
Actually, we intended to, and I know many people don't like the term, but equal misery. So we won't favor anybody. We will dispense the available fuel as much as possible fairly. But that's a good question you raise, and I'd just like to answer with a different mental model, because Mirna was there covering the power shortages during the 90s, early 90s, no?
Ay,
There's
hindi sir, excuse me.
wala pa ba? Okay. Estudyante pa lang. Anyway, there's a big difference kasi nung 90s, ang shortage natin was capacity. Right? So we couldn't really predict kung kailan magkakaroon ng systems-wide blackout. Today, the shortage is fuel, which poses a different set of problem. Now, kung fuel, if I were to go back to the experience in the early 90s, kung sinabi sa akin noon na, okay, may brownout tayo ng 9 hours, but the brownout will be between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., that's probably better than not knowing when the brownouts will be.
Yeah.
And of course, the big issue is the funding deficit, right? There is fuel to be bought, but yung pambili ang problema. So, and I think si Odette has made the distinction between what's in the budget and available cash.
Yeah.
So sana, if we can work together to manage a rationing, right, it will be better for everybody. Of course, NPC will continue to do its best to garner additional funding. But at some point, right, we have to be prepared to actually bear some of the costs. And then the third question, Mirna?
Sir, going back to the second question, the short answer, which ones or areas yung magsasuffer ng the worst, parang ginawa niyo prorated yung pag-distribute ng reduction in operating hours. So kung mahirap ka na, hindi ka na masyadong nasusuplayan dati, mas kailangan pang hindi ka masuplayan. And which ones? Like region lang, if ever. Kung ayaw mo ng specific area kasi baka magalit yung mga...
Maybe I will call VP Larry.
Good morning, Sec. Now, regarding the question of which area, ma'am. Now, based on our simulation, lahat pong SPAG areas covered by our SPAG plans maapektuhan nito. Walang pinipili na lugar. So, we simulated the 24 hours to 15 hours and 16-hour plans to 12 and less than 16 hours to 5 hours, ma'am.
So equal percentage ang ginawa nyo. dun sa pag-reduce ng operating hours if ever. Para
Yes.
pareho lang na reduce yung operating hours.
Yes, ma'am, we computed on the available volume of fuel as what presented earlier.
Yeah. Sir, clarification na lang. So that means even yung mga 24-hour operating areas, pwede pang ma-reduce yon at magkaroon sila ng disruption.
Yes,
Kasi-
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, as presented, all 24/7 plants will be reduced into 15 hours.
Yeah, okay. All right. Sir, yung last question ko is on the subsidy. Sinong agency yung magbibigay ng subsidy? Even yung reimbursement for the BNPP expenses, if ever.
Hi, good morning. This is Odette Rivero. For the funding sources, aside from the Energy Regulatory Commission for the UCME, for the government side, we're looking at the energy subsidy from the DBM and the DOF also for the BNPP reimbursement.
All right. Okay.
So
Yeah.
Mirna,
Yes, sir.
since this is a funding problem, we are working with all the branches of government. So we are working with the Development Budget Coordination Committee because both the Department of Budget and Management and the Department of Finance is chair of the Board of National Power Corporation, as well as DBM and NEDA being members. And of course, Congress, because it is in Congress that we, in fact, in the last budget cycle, we got strong support for the policy to ensure that there is continued delivery of supply to the missionary areas. The challenge, of course, as pointed out by President Nani, is that the problem is with the price of the fuel. There is enough fuel out there, provided that we are able to afford them at the price that is being sought. But one must remember, we are also working with the Energy Regulatory Commission, because right now it is the universal charge for missionary electrification that is answering for the subsidy. And unfortunately, there are applications as far back as 2014 that have not been acted upon. And that amounts to 30 billion pesos alone. And so these applications for true-up have affected the finances available under the universal charge for missionary electrification. And even if ERC were going to catch up with the required pace for approving those, then it will be our on-grid customers or consumers that will have to take up that burden. So it is a case which the national government is trying to address in a balanced way, that all of us will have to share in the burden of addressing this. So there are reforms that are needed as well on the part of a number of our electric cooperatives, and that's why Administrator Almeida has been working with them on the contingency measures, as well as on making the operations more efficient. So the national government has been quietly providing for support. So last year, when the new administration came in, more than 2 billion was already infused. But since we were making up for amounts that were not there even before that time, at the end of the year, Napocor still had 3 billion deficit. And remember, this is not National Power Corporation's deficit. It is a deficit of the universal charge for missionary electrification. And so that's the issue that we would have to address for the long term. Is it the on-grid missionary areas, on-grid main areas, that the customers there will have to bear the burden in order to subsidize the missionary areas? Or do we have to rethink this particular approach and place also the responsibility on the state as well? Now, this require serious thinking on the part of all concerned, and even the customers themselves in the missionary areas will have to also do their share. I know they have already been doing their share by suffering some of the power interruptions, but we want to find a sustainable way out of this problem. Thank you. Sorry, I took more time. Please.
Okay, we have another question, but before we call CNN, there is a question here in our chat box for the proposed borrowings mentioned as possible fund sources for this year. How much is this, and when soonest do you think this will be dispersed? If approved, will consumers shoulder this?
So with regard to the 5 billion that NPC is working with the Department of Finance, we're still awaiting the sovereign guarantee to be issued by the President of the Philippines. We're looking at 5 billion, and we're hoping that this could come in within the month, and this will be part of our funding sources for 2023 to somehow alleviate our requirements for the year.
Okay, question from CNN, please.
Greg. George Kailas po of CNN Philippines. Yeah, ibabalik ko lang po yung question kaninang binasa. Sabi niya, if the borrowings will be approved, sino po yung mag-shoulder? Will it be the consumers?
Well, in the long run, it has to be recovered from the consumers. But then, at the rate at which it is going to be, to be recovered, will be in accordance with a schedule that National Power Corporation will draw up, depending also on the amounts that are going to be drawn from that particular credit line. So if there is enough funding, both from the increase in the universal charge for missionary electrification and from subsidies from the national government, and there is only need for a partial drawdown from the credit line, then that can help soften. Then if in some of the missionary areas, there can be an upward adjustment of the rates, so that those who are more capable of paying the true cost of power will bear their proportionate burden, then that can also soften the impact on the rest of the consumers, particularly the most vulnerable among the groups.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
If I can just add, we should not lose sight of the general formula under the Philippine Energy Plan, which requires energy transition. So the energy transition formula will also push a better scenario for all of us, because number one, there's energy efficiency that we are practicing. Number two, there is the development of the indigenous sources, which focuses on renewable energy, so that we're not as affected by the volatility of the prices in the international market. We also have the development of other energy technologies, which includes the energy storage systems, which the Power Bureau right now, together with the Renewable Energy Management Bureau, is working on, so that we liberalize the system, the policy for energy storage. We also have resiliency and information communication technologies that we are incorporating, so that we have a whole of government and a whole of technology to attack this problem, and we make ourselves more sustainable. Focusing also that National Power Corporation has this 86 years with that leaf that focuses on sustainability. So we have to not lose sight of the direction that in all of these approaches, we have the demand side, the supply side, the development of indigenous sources, as well as the use of ICT, information communication technology, para mas comprehensive yung solutions na pinopropose natin. And that will also address yung issues natin on how we can sustain the 7.6 GDP growth despite all these challenges. I believe we have that formula, and as mentioned by the Secretary earlier to the heads of the GOCCs, PISAM, NAPOCOR, NEA, we will have a more comprehensive alignment of these strategies, considering also that the Philippine Development Plan has already been approved and has been launched, and there are discussions today also on how to provide solutions. So we're looking at inflation, we're looking at global scenarios and how we strengthen the Philippine position, most especially the vulnerable areas that are called the missionary areas in the Philippines.
All right. Ito po yung totoong question ko kasi. Can you please help us laymanize the problem? Kasi, of course, what will be its impact to consumers? Kasi kanina po, you talked about the lack of budget, etc. So, what is it for us? Ano pong mangyayari sa aming mga normal na consumers? Just for us to understand it fully. And, ayun, yun na po muna. Thank you.
Well, let me put it this way. We are vulnerable to all the volatilities in the prices of fuel as far as the missionary areas are concerned. And therefore, the analogy I would give is when in 1973, oil prices went up from a few cents to dollars, how did the Filipino people respond? There was no magic wand. We had to absorb the cost. And that's the reality we have to live with. And therefore, what we are trying to do is making sure that the impact is softened and that the supply, as much as possible, is going to be sustained. So the importance of ensuring supply is to enable our people to carry out their economic activities as normally as possible. But on the price side, I've always said I'd have no magic wand to solve the problem on the price, and the solutions that have been presented include, of course, the introduction of RE, which has no fuel costs, more hybridization, and so on. But this will take some time, and we are not under any illusion that it's going to occur overnight. Isabel, you were going to say something?
No, just because he wanted the laymanized version.
Yes, please.
So best case scenario would be you would be able to get the loans and the additional budget, and the SPUG areas will proceed as what it is today. But in case we do not get all of those, then there will be reduction in service.
Okay, is that plain enough?
Sir, yeah, so technically, currently parang nakaamba yung pagtaas ng presyo ng kuryente. At the same time, potentially we will be having brownouts kung hindi ito magkakaroon ng pondo, mapupunuan yung funding natin for this year.
Sir Greg, teka, pag nating paghalu-haluin, George. Doon ang pinag-uusapan natin ngayon yung missionary areas, hindi yung main grid. So sa missionary areas, ibig sabihin, yung mga sineserve ng NAPOCOR. So pagka doon sa mga areas na yun, ito yung pinag-uusapan natin na best case scenario, kung paano sila ngayon nag-ooperate, ganun pa din. Best case scenario yan kapag ka nakuha natin yung loan at nakuha natin yung additional funding. Worst case scenario, yung pinakita ni Ma'am Odette kanina na may reduction in hours of operation. Yun. So, yun lang ang pinag-uusapan natin today. Wala tayong ibang topic ngayon. Kaya wala pa tayong pinag-uusapan na price increase.
Pero ma'am, may pinakita siya kaninang 0.15.
Okay. Yung isa sa mga way para madagdagan yung universal charge, yung universal charge for missionary, electrification ay pag-increase by 15 centavos per kilowatt hours kung ma-approve ng ERC. So naka-propose pa lang yun, di pa natin alam kung ma-approve ng ganung amounts or uunti-untiin siya over the years.
Yeah, exactly ma'am. Parang potentially magkakaroon na increase if hindi hindi mapupunan yung budget natin for this year or kung aprubahan nga ng ERC as you mentioned, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, Germs, these are contingency measures. We've got to think about contingencies because we have to prepare our people and to bring home the point that we all have to work together in order to make our use of power more efficient. So, energy conservation is important. It helps every consumer as well in managing his or her bills. And it helps the operations of both the new power providers and National Power Corporation in continuing their supply to our people.
All right, thank you po. Good morning.
Okay, there's a question here again. This is from here na again. How much are the prevailing rate in off-grid areas? How much is the cost subsidy being paid on average?
Iba-iba yung sagot dyan. No? Depende kung saan area. Ano yung pinakamababa?
Average.
Mga average lang.
Average.
690
Kasi may stagger yan, di ba? Yung subsidized rate approved ng ERC.
Yes, right.
Can you show the DOE presentation, the slides?
The true cost and the subsidized.
Yeah, back. That would be slide 6. Yeah, this one. So our subsidized approved generation rate, that's about 6.95 for Mindoro.
Yeah.
And then for the UCLE, that's 18 centavos per kilowatt hour.
No, yung subsidy per kilowatt hour per area on average. It used to be mga 8 hanggang 14 pesos, no? So now how much with the 74 na fuel cost base level that you've used? Kahit yung range lang.
The true cost.
True cost of generation, di ba, up to 65 pesos?
65 pesos?
18 pesos.
18 pesos.
No, that's already increased from 18 to around
22.
22 minus yan.
Yeah,
22 pesos yung maximum, ano?
right. So 22 minus
7.
The
15.
So
right?
15 pesos ang subsidy.
Yeah, that's the subsidy. So you can imagine if the assumptions, the time that the UCME was approved, the assumptions were the subsidy was only going to be half of that. Then we are faced with having to fill in
The other half.
the other half now.
Yeah. Sir, since andyan ka na, obviously yung one problem natin, lag in regulation, what have we not learned since EPIRA? Kasi parang hindi nag-i-improve eh. Kasi 20 years ago na yan eh, tapos ganyan pa rin tayo, go back to
I
basic problem of supply chain.
disagree with you. We have not learned since 1973 because we regress. At that time, we already knew the impact of the oil price increase. We knew our vulnerabilities. Now, government tried to do a lot of projects in the renewable side. That's why you had the development of geothermal, you had
Hydro.
the building of the mega dams. But you see, these were not enough to reach the missionary areas. The missionary areas, many of them have been enjoying electricity only for the last decade or so. Or there are even areas up to now which have not been reached. And this amounts to around 1 million households all over the country, which represents around 5 million people who are without access to electricity right now. So that is a state commitment. That is one of our commitments under the UN Sustainable Development Goals, under goal number 7. And so should it, that's why I posed the question of, should it be primarily the on-grid customers who should bear the burden of providing the electric power needs of the missionary areas? Or is that something, in fact, that the state should take on pursuant to its responsibilities under the Sustainable Development Goals? So it's something that we need to work on, but in the meantime, let's all work together. And we want to emphasize that this is not a case where National Power Corporation and National Electrification Administration refuse to give money, or they have money and which they are not using for that purpose. It's a case where the money is really not enough under the present conditions to subsidize all the needs of our developing areas in the country.
Sir, is it time to crack the whip? And who will crack the whip and to whom?
Do you have a magic whip that you want to crack? Mirna? No,
You should come up with.
yes, we will. This will need reforms, as I said, not only on the generation side, but on the distribution side, and on the part as well as on the expectations also of our people in the missionary areas. So if all commercial and industrial users in provinces like Palawan and Mindoro are enjoying that subsidy of how much did we have? 15 pesos per kilowatt hour. I think what is this? We really need to think of ways of bearing our respective responsibilities on that. Yeah.
Yes. Also, with the IPIRA, we have more participation. In fact, more of it comes from the private sector. Now, the coordination function of the Department of Energy is highlighted because we have more players to coordinate with. We also have the demand side to coordinate with. So that's the reason why have we learned from IPIRA and all these reforms. Yes, we have, because we have more private sector involved. We have also distributed the risk, not only from government, but also from the private sector. But in the end, whether it's public sector only or mixed with the private sector, as what we have right now, the customers are the ultimate investors of the electricity or of the energy sector. Because in the end, what IPIRA has taught us is that not anything, the electricity, the services are not free. So hindi siya libre, dapat lahat tayo magtutulungan, i-unbundle natin yan, we identify the problem, and then we attack the problem. It's either money, it's either demand side, it's either technology, and all these scenarios are all available because we have IPIRA, and we have the RE law, and we have the Energy Efficiency and Conservation law, we have the Microgrid Systems Act. So all these nakakatulong for us to address vulnerabilities in the international prices movement, no, sa fuel especially.
Okay, you'll have to excuse me, but if you still have some questions sometime, you can carry on. But thank you very much for attending the session this morning, and please carry on. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, for our other, for other issues, Yusek Quenteteria and Yusek Ibarra will be here, are here to answer your questions. Any other questions on the issue, or do we, okay, there's a question here. Kung i-approve ko ng ERC yung request for increase, how soon likely mararamdaman ng lahat ng consumer yung increase, and na-request na po ba ito sa ERC?
2 months.
So for the ERC, assuming the ERC approves part of the petition of NPC, that would be effective May 2022.
Okay. There's a question here for the secretary, but I think Yusek maybe and Yusek could answer this. For Sec Coco, do you think it's time for NAPOCOR or government to leave power generation? To leave power generation.
What is left with the National Power Corporation is the missionary area, no? As mentioned in the slides of National Power Corporation, more than 70% are already with the private sector. However, we have to contend, no, dun sa reality na merong mga area na hindi talaga viable. Kaya naiiwan si National Power Corporation as a supplier of last resort. So, ibig sabihin, tatanggalin ba natin si National Power Corporation? Hindi po pwede kasi meron po talagang area na walang private sector na gustong pumasok.
Any other question on the NAPOCOR issue? None.
Namalampayan na.
For other issues, yeah, question please on other issues. If you have. Here na, or
Yeah, I have question about Malampaya. Kay Yusek Guevara or dalawang Yusek. In the past kasi all the yung maintenance shutdown ng Malampaya. Yung cost impact niya staggered yung pass on. Is there a move now to stagger the pass on? Kasi mga 79 centavos din yung impact that was calculated by Meralco in particular. Then my second question is, reduced yung generation ng Santa Rita and San Lorenzo. So, what's the scenario when it comes to supply? Yung talagang scenario that will happen?
Wala tayong problema sa supply as far as the dates February 4 to 18 when Malampaya is going to be maintained. Yung sinabi mo na 79 centavos na possible additional cost, only kung patatakbuhin ng full blast yung dalawang plantang sinabi mo. Pero malalaman natin yan on those dates kasi depende sa consumption ng mga tao. So that 79 centavos will only happen if those two plants are run in full load.
Yeah. Yusek, parang hindi eh. Kasi yung calculation ng Meralco is, yung magiging generation lang ng Santa Rita, nasa 324 megawatts and then 141 for San Lorenzo for that calculation. So, hindi talaga siya full.
That's what I meant by full kasi yun yung kaya nilang i-run on those dates.
Oh, so yun yung definition ng full on that particular.
So mayroon na pag mas mababa doon, hindi ganun kalaki yung magiging impact sa cost. So yun yung worst case scenario kumbaga.
Yeah, and then they would have, for whatever it is that they would have to supply to Meralco, it should be sourced from the WSM. Kasi may contract capacity sila eh.
Yeah, in case kakapusin sila, they will go to us.
Yeah. So yung full cost impact of Malampaya shutdown, do you have that already on top of this, yung calculation nila na fuel shifting?
Those numbers that you just mentioned, yan yung worst case scenario talaga. Hindi pa naman natin alam kung gaano ang consumption ng tao. Ang inaasahan natin, kagaya ngayon, hindi naman ganun kainit, so hindi pa full blast yung mga aircon ng mga tao. So hindi na kailangan patakbuhin at those levels yung dalawang planta. So pag nangyari yun, hindi tayo magkakaroon ng additional 79 centavos per kilowatt hour.
Yung best case scenario, ma'am, ano yung nakikita niyo?
Best case scenario, wala tayong additional 79.
Pero may additional pa rin. Like how much if ever?
Ay, hindi. Yun na nga yung best case. Walang additional. Zero.
Totally walang additional if ever.
That's the best case.
So yun na yung, kasi in all Malampaya shutdowns, kahit January or Feb, nagkakaroon talaga ng increase eh. So it's only this time na ang best case scenario, pwedeng walang.
NEA kasi dati ang kanyang maintenance happens in October eh. Iba ang power outlook during those months eh.
There's January 2019 yata or 2018. Nag-January shutdown sila ng 2 weeks.
Oo. So ang aming based on the capacities that we have for 2023, iba kasi yung situation now eh than in 2021. Yun yung best case talaga na hindi tayo kakailanganin pagpatakbo ng mga ibang santa, so walang additional. Yun ang best case.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.
Thank you. Si Yusek Jimmy, meron siyang announcement.
Yes, by February, kung saan magsa-celebrate ng birthday si Asek Mario, 63rd, the Department of Energy assures everyone that the 8 to 5 na customer response or yung frontliners natin will remain. Pero merong movement sa office hours ng 90% or na hindi humaharap sa consumers kasi ginalaw po ng Department of Energy yung time in at saka yung time out ng mga tao. Why are we doing this? This is an anti-inflationary measure. At dinagdag pa dyan, magkakaroon tayo ng dagdag na 1 work from home day, pero bawas naman na nasa opisina, yung 5 days magiging 4 days. So first, 8 to 5 services natin sa ating mga consumers, sa ating mga constituency is in place. Secondly, yung office hours will be 7:30 hanggang 4:30. At we are exploring making our representations to the Civil Service Commission to make it earlier. Why? Because number 3, we want to contribute na mabawasan yung traffic sa ating mga kalye. And ipopropose natin ito sa Interagency Energy Efficiency and Conservation Committee kung paano yung buong government mag-adapt ng ganitong scheme. Tapos kasama pa dyan, meron tayong dinagdag na work from home every Friday, karamihan sa Department of Energy employees mag-work from home so that we can also reduce yung consumption natin sa crude petroleum products. So we're anticipating around 10 to 20% reduction dyan. So opisina pa lang namin at tinitingnan din yan ng Interagency Energy Efficiency and Conservation Committee together with our coordination with the independent constitutional bodies such as the Civil Service Commission. So these are all part of the overall na scheme ng department na hindi lang siya supply issues ang tinitingnan, pati behavioral at saka demand side management. So if we can discipline ourselves sa Department of Energy looking into this, then we can argue better before the interagency and we can argue better before the Civil Service Commission and convince that the national government agencies, GOCCs, and the other mga agents ng government that if we do this, we help everyone. We also declog the streets and we also lessen the usage of fuel and lessen also the CO2 emissions. So that's the announcement. It will start February 1 sa buwan ng 63rd birthday ni Asek Mario at ni Asek Maylin. 62 pala. Sorry, nadagdagan ko po ng isa. Advance lang po. So, yun lang po. Maraming salamat po. Sabi ka doon eh.
Wala na po. Now that concludes our press conference for today. We will send you our press release on the core issue that we discussed earlier. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Paki-edit yung mga facial expressions ko ha. Thank you. Si Mario kasi ang